You really think you can just question how Dad and I have been running things? This trust is what keeps the family together, Emily. I've been the one putting in the hours, making the tough calls. You show up now with your suspicions and think you're entitled to answers? That memo you got your hands on is private. If you spread it around, you're not just hurting me, you're hurting Dad, too. He trusted me with this. The slush fund is for emergencies, for opportunities. You wouldn't get it because you've always been on the sidelines playing it safe. Sign the papers to stay quiet, or you're on your own. No more family dinners, no more help when things get tough. Decide now. Hi, my name is Emily Harper. I am 27 years old. I stood there in the narrow hallway of my apartment in the hillside enclave above Denver, my hand still on the doorknob, feeling the cold metal against my palm like an anchor. My older brother Ryan had never shown up unannounced like this before. Not in the 3 years since I moved into this modest 2-bedroom place with the view of the foothills. Not once. The words hung between us, sharp and heavy. I could feel my chest tightening, that familiar ache I had spent years trying to ignore. Ryan's face was tight, the same expression he used to wear when we were kids, and I asked too many questions about why he always got the bigger allowance or the nicer bike. Back then, I told myself it was just how big brothers were. Now the same look was aimed at me over something far more serious than childhood jealousy. I stepped back without inviting him in. My voice came out quieter than I wanted. I didn't go looking for anything, Ryan. It found me. He let out a short, bitter laugh and pushed past me into the living room anyway, dropping onto the edge of my couch like he belonged there. Found you. That's convenient. Dad's been carrying this family on his back for decades. I stepped up when he needed someone who actually understands how money works. And now you're going to blow it up because you found one piece of paper? I closed the door slowly, buying myself a second to breathe. The apartment felt smaller with him in it. I had spent the last week staring at that memo until the words blurred. It had arrived in a plain envelope at my office mailbox at the investment firm where I worked as a junior compliance analyst. No return address, just a single printed page showing repeated transfers from the family trust into a separate account I had never heard of. An account that only Ryan's name was on. The amounts weren't huge individually, but over 2 years, they added up to more than most people made in a decade. I had shown it to my colleague Sofia Ramirez the next morning, thinking maybe I was misreading the numbers. Sofia had worked at the firm longer than me. She knew how family trusts could get messy. Instead of helping me understand, she had looked at me with something close to pity mixed with warning. "Emily, are you sure you want to dig into this?" she had asked, her voice low, even though we were alone in the break room. "Ryan's your brother. Your dad built that trust for all of you. Sometimes families keep things quiet for good reasons. Questioning it can look like you don't trust them, like you're not loyal." The word loyal had landed like a stone in my stomach. I had gone home that night and cried in the shower where no one could hear, because the one person I had hoped would understand was already telling me to stay quiet. That was the first crack. Now Ryan was sitting on my couch, demanding I sign a confidentiality agreement that would legally bind me to silence about anything I had seen. He kept talking, his voice getting faster, sharper. Dad's not getting any younger. He wanted me to handle the active investments because I actually have the stomach for it. That separate account is just a buffer. If the market dips or an opportunity comes up fast, we don't have to wait for 3 signatures. It's practical. You turning this into some big betrayal is exactly why he didn't loop you in from the start. I stayed standing near the door, arms crossed over my chest. My throat felt tight. "You're saying Dad knew? That he helped set it up this way?" Ryan's jaw flexed. For a second, I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Maybe guilt. Maybe just irritation that I was still asking questions. He signed the papers. He trusted me. That's what family does. We don't second-guess each other in public. We handle it inside. I thought about the father I had grown up with, the man who used to sit at the kitchen table, helping me with algebra until midnight, who always said honesty mattered more than being comfortable. The same man who had apparently signed off on moving money into his son's private account without ever mentioning it to his daughter. The betrayal wasn't just the money. It was the quiet rewriting of who we were as a family. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at it out of habit. A text from Sophia. "Hey, just checking in. Hope everything's okay with your family stuff. Remember what I said, some things are better left alone? Call me if you need to talk." I didn't answer it. Not then. Ryan stood up, smoothing the front of his button-down shirt. He looked tired in a way I hadn't noticed before. "Look, I'm not trying to be the bad guy here. Sign the agreement, Emily. Let Dad keep his peace. You keep your job and your quiet life up here in the hills. Everyone wins." I looked at the paper he had placed on my coffee table. It was short, professional, and final. Signing it would mean I agreed never to discuss the transfers, never to ask questions, never to involve any outside party. It would also mean I accepted that my father had chosen to keep me in the dark, and my brother had been the one executing it. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. "I need time to think." Ryan's expression hardened again. "Time is the one thing we don't have. Dad's meeting with the trust administrator next week. If you're going to cause problems, we need to know now." He left without another word, closing the door harder than necessary. I stood in the middle of my living room for a long time after he was gone, staring at the unsigned paper. That night I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and let myself feel it all. The hurt, the confusion, the sharp sting of being treated like the problem instead of the person who had been kept in the dark. I had spent years trying to be the easy daughter, the one who didn't make waves, the one who showed up for holidays and didn't ask why Ryan always seemed to have more say in family decisions. I had told myself it didn't matter. It mattered now. I picked up my phone and opened a new message to Sophia. My fingers hovered over the screen. Part of me wanted to ask her again for advice, to see if she would finally understand why this felt so wrong. But her earlier words were still sitting heavy in my chest. Loyalty. Family. Quiet. Instead, I typed something else. "I think I need to talk to someone outside the family about this. A lawyer, maybe. Just to understand what my options are." I didn't send it yet. I saved it as a draft and set the phone down. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Outside the window, the lights of Denver sparkled far below the hills. I had built a small, steady life here. My job, my routines, the peace of coming home to a space that was only mine. I had never asked for more than that. But the memo had changed something, and Ryan's visit had made it impossible to pretend I could just sign and forget. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. I only knew that for the first time in a long time, I was afraid of what staying silent would cost me, and what speaking up might take away. I closed my eyes and let the tears come, quiet and steady, the way they always did when no one else was around to see. The sting of Ryan's words stayed with me long after the door closed. I didn't move for a while. The unsigned confidentiality agreement sat on the coffee table like a test I hadn't studied for. My older brother had made it sound simple: sign and keep the peace, or stand alone. What he didn't say out loud was that standing alone had always been the role he and my father seemed most comfortable assigning me. Later that night, I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, the way I used to do when I was little, and the house felt too loud. I let myself feel it for exactly one stretch of minutes, the hurt that my father had signed off on something that kept me in the dark, the sharper cut of my older brother treating my questions like an attack. Then I stood up, washed my face, and opened my laptop. I needed to understand what the memo actually meant before I decided anything. The firm where I worked as a junior compliance analyst had resources, but I couldn't use them for personal family business. So I searched for trust and estate attorneys in Denver who handled private family arrangements and didn't advertise on billboards. One name kept coming up in quiet reviews: James Caldwell. He wasn't flashy. His practice focused on reviewing existing trusts for beneficiaries who felt something had been handled off the books. I sent a short email asking for a consultation. Nothing dramatic, just reviewing family trust documentation and need an outside opinion. The next morning at the office, I kept my head down. Sophia stopped by my desk with 2 coffees and that careful, concerned expression she wore when she was about to say something she thought was helpful. "I saw your message last night," she said, keeping her voice low even though the floor was mostly empty. "Emily, I know this is hard, but going to a lawyer, that's a big step. Your dad built that trust for all of you. Ryan's been the one actually managing the investments while you've been building your own life. Sometimes families protect each other by not putting every detail on the table. If you push this, it could look like you're choosing sides against them." I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup she'd brought. The warmth didn't reach the cold spot in my chest. "Sophia, the transfers weren't small, and they went to an account only Ryan controls. That doesn't feel like protection. It feels like something was hidden on purpose." She sighed and glanced around before answering. "I'm not saying you're wrong to be upset. I'm saying you might be reading the worst possible intention into something that was just practical. Your brother has always been the one who stepped up when things needed doing. Maybe your dad wanted to give him room to do that without making you feel left out. Questioning it now could make things worse for everyone, including you. People talk in this industry. Word gets around that you don't trust your own family, and suddenly clients wonder if you'll keep their information private too." The implication landed cleanly. She wasn't threatening me. She was warning me about consequences I hadn't considered. My job, my reputation here could be affected if this turned into a public family fight. I thanked her for the coffee and told her I would think about it. She nodded like she hoped that meant I would drop it. I didn't drop it. That afternoon I left work early and drove to James Caldwell's office in a quiet building near downtown. He was in his late 50s, calm in the way people get when they've seen every version of family disappointment. I brought the memo and copies of the trust documents I had requested from the administrator over the years. I didn't cry or rant. I just laid it out. Repeated transfers to a separate account, my name never on any of the activity. My older brother now demanding I sign something that would prevent me from asking questions. James read everything twice before he spoke. "The structure itself isn't illegal on its face," he said. "But the pattern of moving funds without notifying all beneficiaries, especially when one beneficiary is also the person receiving the funds, raises questions about self-dealing. If your father signed off on giving your brother this level of unilateral control, that's one thing. If he didn't fully understand what he was signing, or if there was pressure, that's another. Either way, you have a right to ask for a full accounting. And you have a right to refuse to sign anything that waives that right. He didn't push me toward a lawsuit. He didn't promise I would get money. He simply laid out what the documents suggested, and what my options were if I wanted clarity instead of silence. When I left his office, I felt steadier than I had in days. Not because I had a plan to win, but because someone outside the family had looked at the same papers and said the questions were reasonable. On the drive home, my father called. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me needed to hear his voice. "Emily," he said when I answered. His tone was careful, the way it got when he was trying to manage a situation. "Ryan told me he stopped by. I wish you had come to me first instead of going straight to an attorney. That makes it look like you don't trust us." I pulled into a grocery store parking lot so I could focus. "Dad, the memo showed money moving from the trust into an account only Ryan can touch. A lot of money over time. I asked Ryan about it, and he told me to sign something that would make me promise never to talk about it. That's not trust. That's control." There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I let Ryan handle more of the active decisions a few years ago because I was tired, Emily. After your mother's health issues and the market swings, I didn't want to be the one making every call anymore. Ryan convinced me that having a separate buffer account would let him move fast when opportunities came up. He said it would protect the main trust from volatility. I signed the amendment. I didn't read every line the way I should have. I trusted him to look out for the family the way I always tried to." The admission sat between us. My father, the man who had once made me rewrite an entire school paper because I had copied one sentence without citing it, had signed something without reading it because his son asked him to. The deception wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet and ordinary. The kind that happens when one person gets used to being the one in charge and the other gets used to letting him. "I'm not trying to take anything from anyone," I said. My voice stayed even though my hands were tight on the steering wheel. "I just want to know what actually belongs to the trust and what doesn't. And I'm not going to sign something that says I can never ask again." My father exhaled like the words cost him. "Ryan's under a lot of pressure right now. The investments haven't performed the way he expected. That separate account, some of it has already been used. If this gets pulled into the open, it could affect more than just our family. Clients, partners, people who trusted us." He didn't say it as a threat. He said it like a fact he was finally admitting out loud. The slush fund wasn't just sitting there. It had been spent. And now, the people who had benefited from the arrangement were worried about what would happen if the arrangement was examined. I told him I needed time and ended the call. I didn't cry this time. I sat in the parking lot until the sky started to darken, and then I drove home. When I got back to my apartment, there was another envelope waiting in my mailbox. No stamp, just my name in block letters. Inside was a single printed page from Alex Rivera. I recognized the name from old family business stories Ryan used to tell, someone who had worked with him on early investments and then been edged out when things got more family-only. The note was short. "Emily, I sent the first memo because I watched Ryan do this before. He'll tell you it's temporary that he'll put it back. He won't. Your father signed because he didn't want to fight. If you stay quiet, you'll be protecting the version of the family they want to keep. If you don't, they'll make it your fault. Either way, you're on your own. I'm sorry." I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it in the same drawer where I kept the first memo and the red wax seal I had kept from an old letter my grandmother once sent me. Not because I planned to use any of it as ammunition, but because I needed to remember that the questions I was asking had answers, even if the people I loved didn't want me to hear them. That night, I drafted an email to the trust administrator, requesting a full current accounting of all accounts connected to the original trust, including any amendments or side arrangements. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply asked for transparency as a named beneficiary. I copied James Caldwell so there was a record. Before I hit send, my phone lit up with a text from Ryan. "Dad said you talked. Don't do anything stupid. We can still fix this if you sign and we all move on. Last chance." I didn't answer. I hit send on the email instead. The confirmation appeared on my screen. The request was logged. Somewhere in an office across town, someone would start pulling records. My older brother would find out. My father would have to answer for what he had signed. And I would have to live with whatever came next. I turned my phone face down on the table and went to bed. For the first time in weeks, I didn't lie awake wondering what the right thing was. I already knew. The right thing was refusing to sign away my right to ask questions. Everything else, losing the version of family I had pretended was still whole, watching people I loved scramble to protect what they had taken, was just the cost of that choice. I didn't know yet how high the cost would go, but I knew I wasn't going to pay it by staying silent. The next morning I woke up to 3 missed calls from my father and 1 text from my older brother that simply said, "We need to talk. Now." I didn't call back. Instead, I made coffee and opened my laptop to find a reply from the trust administrator already in my inbox. They had received my request for a full accounting and would be compiling the records, including all amendments and side accounts, within 10 business days. A copy had also gone to James Caldwell at my request. The process had officially begun. I was still reading the email when my phone rang again. This time I answered. Emily. My father's voice sounded strained, older than it had the day before. The administrator just contacted me. They said you asked for everything. Everything. Do you understand what that does? It pulls in people who have nothing to do with our family. Partners, accountants. It makes it look like we did something wrong. I kept my voice quiet. I asked for what belongs to the trust, Dad. If nothing wrong happened, the records will show that. He was silent for a moment. Then he said something I had never heard from him before. Ryan told me years ago that if we kept everything in one pot, the market swings would scare you. He said you were too cautious, that you'd want to sell everything the first time it dipped. So I let him create the buffer. I let him move money without telling you every time. I told myself it was protecting you from worry. That was the deception, Emily. I chose to believe the version that let me stay comfortable. The words landed without drama. No raised voices, no slammed doors. Just my father finally saying out loud that he had chosen his son's version of the story over the truth that included all 3 of his children. I felt the grief of it in my chest, sharp and clean. Then I let it pass through me, because holding on to it would have kept me stuck. I'm not going to sign anything that says I can never ask questions again, I told him. And I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. He didn't argue. He just sounded tired when he answered. Then I don't know how we come back from this. I didn't either. I told him I loved him and ended the call. It was the last time we spoke. By midday, my older brother had escalated. He showed up at the parking garage of my office building instead of my apartment. I was walking to my car after a meeting when I saw him leaning against the driver's side door of my sedan, arms crossed, the same tight expression from the night he had demanded I sign. "You sent the request," he said. No greeting. Dad's been on the phone with the administrator for an hour. They're asking about every transfer. You have any idea what that looks like to the people we work with? Clients who trusted us with their money are already hearing whispers that something's off with the Harper Family Trust. One of them called me this morning, asking if everything was stable. That's your fault. I stopped a few feet away, keys in my hand. The transfers were real. Ryan, the account was real. Asking for records isn't an attack. It's the minimum I should have done years ago. He pushed off the car and stepped closer. His voice dropped into that cold, sarcastic register he used when he wanted to make me feel small. You've been the minimum daughter for years. You show up for Christmas, you send the group text on birthdays, And you act like that makes you part of the decisions. I'm the one who stayed up nights when the markets tanked. I'm the one who kept Dad from panicking and selling everything at the bottom. And now you want to play the victim because you found a memo? Grow up, Emily. Sign the damn paper, tell the administrator you made a mistake, and let the adults handle the money the way we always have. The words were meant to cut. They did. But I had already decided I wasn't going to bleed in front of him anymore. I'm not signing it, I said. And I already told the administrator I want the accounting. If the records show everything was proper, then we'll all know. If they don't, then everyone who needs to know will know. My older brother stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. For a second, I thought he might actually apologize or explain. Instead, he laughed once, short and ugly. You just torched whatever was left of this family. Hope whatever principle you think you're standing on is worth it when you're sitting alone at Thanksgiving. He walked away without waiting for an answer. I got in my car and drove home with my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't cry until I was inside with the door locked. Then I let it happen for 10 minutes in the dark living room. The grief of knowing my older brother had just chosen the money and the story over any real relationship with me. The knowledge that my father had let it happen for years because it was easier. The sharp loneliness of realizing that the version of family I had been protecting in my head had never actually existed for me. When the tears stopped, I washed my face, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat at my kitchen table with my phone. I blocked both my father's and my older brother's numbers. I blocked the family group chat. I sent one last message to my mother, explaining that I needed space and would reach out when I was ready, if I ever was. She replied with a single heart emoji and nothing else. I took that as her choice to stay out of it. Over the next 10 days, the accounting came back. James Caldwell reviewed it with me in his office. The transfers had been larger than I realized, and had been used for a mix of personal investments and to cover shortfalls in other ventures my older brother had taken on. Some of the documentation was thin. The trust administrator flagged several of them for further review. Word spread in the small circle of people who handled money for families like ours in the hills above Denver. 2 longtime clients quietly moved their accounts. A business partner who had been friendly with my father for 20 years stopped returning calls. The community standing my older brother and father had spent years cultivating began to fray at the edges. Not because I made a scene, but because the records spoke for themselves when someone finally asked to see them. I didn't celebrate any of it. I didn't feel victorious. I felt the quiet, heavy truth that I had chosen clarity over the comfort of pretending. Some days that clarity felt like freedom. Other days it felt like standing in an empty room where laughter used to live. Sophia at work kept her distance after the first week. She never said anything directly, but the invitations to lunch stopped. I understood. She had warned me about loyalty, and I had chosen a different kind. 3 weeks after I sent the accounting request, a plain envelope arrived at my apartment with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper in my older brother's handwriting. You win. The account is frozen, pending review. Dad's barely speaking to anyone. The partners are asking questions we can't answer without making it worse. You wanted the truth out? It's out. Enjoy the silence. I read it once, then shredded it. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say that would change what had already been decided. Months passed. Holidays came and went without calls or cards. I spent Thanksgiving with a small group of coworkers who didn't know the details and didn't ask. Christmas, I cooked a simple meal for myself and watched old movies until I fell asleep on the couch. The silence was sometimes loud, but it was mine. No one was lying to me inside it. No one was asking me to sign away my right to know what was mine. I kept seeing James Caldwell for a few more months while the trust matters sorted themselves out. He never pushed me toward reconciliation or revenge. He simply helped me understand what the final accounting meant for my own portion and what steps I could take to separate my finances cleanly from the rest. When everything was settled, I moved my share into a new, straightforward account with only my name on it. I didn't touch the principal. I let it sit while I figured out what I actually wanted from the rest of my life, now that the old version of family was gone. One quiet evening in early spring, I sat on my small balcony overlooking the foothills and finally let myself say the thing I had been circling for months. I had lost them. Not because I had demanded too much, but because I had refused to accept too little. My older brother had chosen control over honesty. My father had chosen peace over truth. I had chosen myself. The cost was real and permanent. The relief was real and permanent too. I didn't reach out. They didn't reach out again either. The boundary I had drawn that night in my kitchen when I blocked their numbers held. No dramatic final confrontation, no public apology, no last-minute change of heart. Just the steady, ordinary work of living without them. Some people in the old circles still ask mutual acquaintances what happened to the Harper family. The answers are vague because I never gave anyone the full story. The records did that work on their own. My older brother's professional reputation took the hardest hit. My father retreated into a smaller, quieter life. I stayed where I was, in the modest apartment on the hillside, building something smaller but entirely my own. I still miss them sometimes. The version of them I loved before I knew what they were willing to hide. That missing doesn't go away completely, and I don't pretend it does. But I don't regret the choice. Walking away from people who needed me to stay silent in order to love me was the hardest thing I have ever done. It was also the kindest thing I have ever done for myself. Thank you for listening to my story. If you were in my place, would you have signed the paper to keep the family intact? Or would you have asked for the records, even if it meant losing them for good?